Welcome to Across the Arc, where we dive into the extraordinary work of Equity Arc members that are leveling the playing field in classical music. This episode features Project STEP, an entry and pre-college musical training program built to address the imbalance of racial and ethnic minorities in classical music. They achieve this by providing comprehensive and low-cost music and string instrument instruction. Project STEP recently celebrated 40 years of championing equity in classical music and have an impressive list of alumni like Ngio Magrivius, who won this year's Sphinx Senior Division competition, and over 60% of their graduates pursue music as a profession. I spoke with their executive director, Josué Gonzalez, and artistic director and Equity Arc board member, Ian Saunders. They are both musicians and administrators who are passionate about advancing equity in the classical music field. They shared their unique approach to family engagement, examples of strong artistic and community partnerships, and the North Star that guides their work. Without further ado, here is how Project STEP is leveling the playing field across the arc.
Yeah, everything kind of stems from our founding in 1982. I think was the personal manager of the BSO at the time. Having worked with the orchestra and done all these national and international tours, especially the national tours, he came to the conclusion that, out of all these different communities and cities that they would visit, that the BSO just absolutely did not reflect what the rest of society actually is culturally and racially and all of that. And so I think that ethos being so genuine to start the organization, I think that's been able to continue throughout these past 40 years and sort of be the guiding light of what we do. And so we've always had that as sort of our central mission, but also figuring out how to best serve students and families in the pursuit of that, right? So it's a little bit of a interesting question in terms of, okay, well, is our goal to diversify classical music, or is our goal to facilitate children and families in the pursuit of a high quality classical education if they so choose? And I think that's a much more nuanced view of generally similar type of framing, but that I think has been something that has shifted more recently, right? And so our board and a lot of the staff for a very long time were all white. And as all nonprofits start, especially back then, there were a lot of white folks being like, hey, we want to solve this issue and we're going to try to, solve it ourselves. And a lot of those folks were former BSO board members, were members of the committee of volunteers for the BSO. And so they were very orchestra centric and they were very in that bubble. But they knew that there was an issue and they wanted to, be able to help solve that problem. But over time, we've arrived at the point where we want to change the focus to serving students and families and making sure that they have the most free runway possible to be able to pursue a career in this field if they so choose, versus having our metrics be, orchestra diversity or diversity in administrations and arts organizations. Like, we can't control that part of it, but what we can control is like the experience that our families have and the quality of education that they have. So I think, again, it's a nuanced kind of difference, but it makes a huge difference, again, in terms of what we're going to be spending our time and focus on.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So you're talking a lot about serving families. And so I would love for you to talk more about that, what that looks like. I saw that you have some specific programs and councils and things like that. And so if you could share more about what that family engagement looks like for y'all.
Yeah, I actually am not sure exactly when this was instituted, but we have a board that agreed some number of years ago to include two parents as sort of parent representatives on the board as full voting members. And they run a parent council, which meets once a month, where they listen to concerns or suggestions or ideas and try to sort of galvanize the families in that way, and also just relay, what are some sort of big picture things at the board level that a lot of parents might not know. And I think that's been extremely unique, but incredibly invaluable to just communication overall and helping everyone sort of be on the same page, especially with such a small organization, that Project STEP is. We have about 50 plus students and a staff of 5. And so communication can get siloed very easily if we didn't have these types of communication lanes. And so I don't know if Ian, you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say that as far as the parents are concerned, I mean, it kind of goes to this for me, the sort of bird's eye view about things, meaning one, this idea of like a lot of stuff that we do in this industry gets very colloquial and esoteric after a while, right? It's like, well, we do this summer camp, we do this application, we do this audition, we do these seat auditions. And these are often things that I found that kind of get taken for granted and kind of going back to what Josue said before, it's just like it's not always even clear to the parents, like what exactly is, you know, the metric or how do we go about doing this and all that stuff like that. I mean, once they're on board and they kind of understand what that is, they're like, oh, okay, cool. That all makes sense. But more importantly, I think you need to have the feedback from the parents to also have that reciprocity to say, hey, these are concerns and approaches that we have, or here's the best way to, necessarily work with these students. I mean, we are, a school and education, but we're very different in the sense of like, there's a lot of direct collaboration with parents to carve out the best path for each of these students. We have a curriculum, but that curriculum is very, very much kind of based on each student, which is a unique thing. And that comes from that sort of collaboration with them. And like Josue said, there's a lot of things that we also want to do as well, but we also have a small staff, and the way that the parents kind of come through and help out with so many things is also a great thing. And it just ultimately goes to just having this overall sense of community and everything. And I think it's great that they're on the board, right? Because as Josue can tell you, that to get an organization to run well, everybody has to be on the same page about the mission. And too often you'll go somewhere where the board might feel very differently about the mission and what needs to be done versus the student versus the parents and things like that. And so I think it was a great move having them on the board, because everyone is a lot more mission aligned. And when everyone's a lot more mission aligned, it doesn't make achieving the mission easier, but as far as everyone understanding how to get there, it makes it possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was just gonna add, Ian, we both started about a little over a year ago, and like we're still finding all of these like low-hanging fruit, right, that can address some of these things. And Ian, I was actually just thinking yesterday, like for next year's focus too, we should, while the teachers are deciding the sizes, like we should have a senior come and like perform a piece, and then like that parent of the senior should like talk to those focus parents about like their experience. I was like, wow, like that would be so good. Like I don't know why why it didn't occur to me before, but like I think that'd be so valuable. But we're just constantly like just finding these little things. I'm like, oh, like that could just be such a quick, easy thing, but like the yield would be so incredible. But again,
Right.
I everything that Ian said is 100% spot on. It's like it's that colloquialism. It's that like, oh yeah, this is how you do this, or this acronym is pronounced this way. Like just the smallest thing.
Exactly. I mean, it's not uncommon. Like when people think about like Suzuki, obviously like parents are involved in Suzuki, but parents need to be involved sort of like throughout. And one thing that we found, for example, it gets to a point where the parent would have like trouble. Like the kid gets to a point with the parents like, it all sounds good to me. Like I don't know what you're hearing that tells you that the student needs to practice. I can make them practice, but what should I be looking for? How can I be more invested? Like, how can I help them, accomplish their goal? Because it's one thing when you're talking to a musician and you kind of all know those things, but like for example, my mom didn't play. She was super supportive about what I wanted to do, but that doesn't necessarily mean she always knew the next step to take, if that makes sense, with no pun intended. And so it's beautiful because the parents are just like, oh, so and so's at this age, you might want to consider this. One thing that we see as a pattern that I think is natural is that we have students start so young that they get to a point in their career or in their development, in middle school, or hey, things are that's an awkward age, right? It's like preteen, adolescent. You're trying to find yourself. You're trying to figure out what's going on, and you have a lot of students question if they want to keep going or stuff like that. So it is very interesting to hear the parents talk to each other and say like, well, when Samantha was going through this, we did this. And when Susan was going through this, we did this, right? Because that's not a musical thing. That's a life thing. And to have the parents also be able to share their experiences with other parents, in order to keep a kid moving is important. Sometimes we think about music as just the notes, but music is so much more than that. And so it's wonderful being able to see the parents relate life experiences to ultimately help students continue to play.
That's awesome. And it's really cool to hear how big of a role collaboration plays in what you all do. I'm curious about some of the community partnerships you have. I know was what you mentioned in the beginning. Project Step was founded with a lot of BSO involvement. So I'd love to hear about some of those key collaborations that you have from, an artistic side, but also from that community and education side of things.
So let me use two partners to kind of illustrate that point. So one partnership that we have is with a group called A Far Cry, and they're wonderful. The components of that partnership are they have one crier, that's what they call the names of their members. They have one crier come in and coach two of our chamber ensembles throughout the year, which is fantastic because then they get a chance to just really hear like all these different and unique perspectives from these super talented musicians. The other thing is they also invite the players to come play with them. So, like I said, the Far Cry is a great ensemble, and then they'll have the players actually come in and play with them side by side, which is awesome as well. And then they'll also have them, perform in concert. So these are all great. And what makes A Far Cry a wonderful artistic partner is that one, they're so mission aligned. I think it's the definition of what makes a good partnership. They think about the students both inside the classroom and out. I'm constantly talking with them about, maybe next season we should do this. And, one big thing that we came to is just, hey, maybe there's a piece that we can commission that will be for like STEP and AFC to do collaboratively that way. And so that's really, really wonderful. On a very real note, what I love about AFC is that the artistic aspect of what they want to do with these incredible students is artistic. It's even though they want to be involved in community and stuff like that, the idea of we're just out here working with Black and brown kids is not it's not like, because we do get that from certain partners. It's like we'll get people to reach out to us. It's like we want to work with Project Step. It's like, well, what do you know about us? And they're like, well, we know you work with Black and brown kids. It's like, all right, well, I don't think this is gonna work because the intent doesn't feel genuine. Does that make sense? And so with AFC, what's nice is because they're constantly trying to figure out this way of working with them artistically, but it's also this reciprocity because they feel like they learn a lot from the students as well. The great thing about AFC is they're very open-minded and they're very eclectic, which makes them great to mentor a variety of interests in our students. And that's what makes AFC wonderful. And then you have a group like Castle of Our Skins, where Castle is they've done this very unique thing with our students, which is they actually have this commissioned work from Anthony Green where it calls for like a professional string quartet surrounded by a student ensemble. Like it's meant to be performed that way. And all of the pieces are tied to civil rights figures. And so for them, we had this partnership where they wanted to pilot sort of this education curriculum around spirituals and the musicalization of Langston Hughes poems and all these sorts of things. And so they needed a group that was really talented that can sort of do those things to pilot it. But the beautiful thing is our students got a chance to work with them, and ultimately this will manifest into an education curriculum and a piece of work that I think all middle school and high school students will be able to use as a sort of contribution from Project Strep to the overall repertoire. And so that makes a great partnership as well, because you have these two organizations that need each other to get to this greater good, and there's true reciprocity there that they can use to contribute to the overall betterment of the field, if you will. Where like a bad partnership is something where either they're approaching us to try to check a box for community engagement, which we do get a lot of those, and we do say thanks but no thanks, you know what I mean? Because no one likes the feeling of, well, you're just working with me because you have to based off a strategic plan, versus I think we can come together and make something wonderful. You know, what can that be? And those two groups do that really well.
Amazing to hear. And I was thinking, is there anything that well positions Boston for some of those partnerships? And it sounds like yes, because the Far Cry and Casa Skins are, native to there. And, when you hear about other partnerships, like with local symphonies and universities, which I'm sure y'all have those too. I'd love to hear about it. But these are very, unique and kind of specific to Boston. So is there anything else, that makes Boston stand out in terms of having that musical and cultural landscape? Is there anything about that specific community that informs how you do partnerships or the opportunities that you have for your students?
Yeah. So and I'll let, Josué elaborate on it too as well. So for our partnerships, I mean, we kind of break them up into several things. I mean, there's artistic partnerships, and then there are also partners that we have that really help the program to run. Like, for example, we do have a partnership with Symphony Hall, which of course houses Boston Symphony, and they give us space in kind. So that is not necessarily an artistic partnership, but it is an integral partnership in order to have space there. On that note, we do still have BSO musicians who dedicate their time, energy, and they also teach privately, and then in the past probably coached before as well. And then as far as university partnership, I mean, there's the New England Conservatory, which we outsource a lot of our curriculum there. So Project Step does have a curriculum, but we do outsource a lot of it there, such as like the large, symphonic works and things like that, where our students will go over there to study. And our students do study with quite a few NEC teachers as well. So once again, they're very integral in that. And then we also have our focus program, which is our feeder program, where we work with kindergarten students on like music appreciation, general musicianship, and then eventually introductory violin and introductory cello. And then those classes have been offered over at NEC as well, where they kind of provide that space. So that's another example of maybe not necessarily, it's a partnership, but we have buckets where we have our partnerships, if that sort of makes sense. So for us, when you say artistic, is very much thinking about an aspect of the student's artistic development, but we also have a lot of partners who will contribute in different ways to their education as well. And then there's also something like Celebrity Series, which is I'm not sure if that's exclusive to Boston, but Celebrity Series brings in tons of like world-class talent like Joshua Bell, LA Philharmonic, the Berlin Philharmonic, Edgar Meyer, Wynton Marsalis, and things like that. And they will provide heavily reduced tickets and sometimes comp tickets to our students so they can attend those events for free.
I think the only thing I'll add to that is just you're talking about the environment here in this area and the community. I think that makes a huge difference. We were talking to Kirk Johnson, who runs Sounds Academy out of Phoenix, Arizona, and he's a Project Step alum. And in this conversation we had with him recently, it really solidified my sort of feeling that, we are in a very unique position to be able to take advantage of like the extreme density of musical organizations that occupy this particular part of Massachusetts and just New England in general. celebrity series, Boston Symphony, Rockport Music. We're developing a similar type of partnership where they can give us free tickets and, access to master classes. Ashmont Hill Chamber Music Series, same thing. All the universities and conservatories, the folks who we reached out to are really interested in being able to like partner with us or have our students participate in master classes. And so that sort of plugging into a broader network, I think, is absolutely essential and crucial to the success of our program. Whereas like if we were out in the middle of nowhere, we'd be obviously working just as hard, but I think the kids and the families would be really missing out on a lot of like what makes this industry so unique and special. Is just that sort of the interconnected web of like everybody getting to know each other and working together and collaborating and having exterior networks outside of your own bubble. I think it's a really important thing to note. Again, like we're very, very lucky.
Yeah, it's a good problem to have where, without hyperbole, like the students can choose from several things each week. That's how much is going on in Boston at once, where
there's too much to take advantage of. Like actually,
you would never be able to take advantage of it all. Which once again is a good problem to have. I know back home in Virginia, it's like this week the Virginia Symphony, next week the Virginia Symphony, the week after that, you guessed it, Virginia Symphony. It's like, all right, which is great, but it's not the same as there's so many musicians coming into town in Boston. And there's so many great organizations that are also built in to like the Boston ecosystem that it's just like it was world-class talent performing every week. So it's a good problem.
That's awesome. I need to visit. I have not been to Boston. It's on my list and I still haven't gone, but I'll get there. I'm curious about that recruitment side of things. So how you get your students to know about Project STEP? Is it organic now that y'all have been around so long? Are there partnerships that you utilize as well on that side of things?
I'll leave this one up to you. Go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, sure.
I'll lob it over for you to slam dunk this one.
Yeah, exactly. Good question. It's a bit of everything. So there are two ways to get into Project STEP. There's either via audition or it's our focus program, which I mentioned earlier, which is our feeder program. Let me stick with the auditions first. So with the auditions, the way that we get students, one, a lot of our teachers are teaching artists. So which means that not only do they teach your Project STEP, but they teach all around Boston as well. And that network of teachers, they know each other. So a lot of times we'll get a student who's saying that, oh, this teacher said I would be great for this program and they sent me this way. And that happens quite a bit. So that's one way that happens. Two is, some other schools around the area will kind of know when we're going to audition as well, and then we'll get students in that way. So, but it's been mostly word of mouth. We're trying to cast that net a little bit further, but the word of mouth has yielded a lot of students to audition every year, for sure. Now, focus is the way that you get into the Project STEP as a true beginner. You do not have to have any previous experience on any of the string instruments to get into there. So our focus programs actually run at 3 different sites. One is where we are located, which is at Symphony Hall. The other is at a local school named Umana, and another is at a local school named Trotter. And these are all sort of strategic in a way that at the end of the day, because Project STEP wants to have students from the adjacent community that way, and these are all Boston Public Schools as well. And so our focus program usually starts in January, and our first focus is broken into 2 groups, Focus 1 and Focus 2. So Focus 1, we work with these school sites, and it's general music education. And it's also a way that we can have this partnership because a lot of Boston public schools, their music education has been severely cut in some ways, which is unfortunate. So in some ways, we're kind of there to augment and, add additional support. And then from there, our teacher will kind of recommend students for, our Focus 2 program, which is introductory violin and cello, which starts in May. And then from there, they'll be recommended into the core program. So you can get into, like I said, Project Step one of two ways. We have had a lot of students who've been in the focus program who maybe didn't matriculate into the core program, but came back the next year to audition. And so that's another way, as far as like it stays in the minds and hearts of the parents and students as well. And then those parents also kind of pass along the word about Project Step as well. And the crazy thing is, we got somebody from Michigan was asking us about auditions. I don't know how they found out about us in Michigan, but they did. So, there was certainly that there. And then actually recently, very recently, there was a student who was in Cincinnati for the Neiman Festival Orchestra, and he was moving from Texas to Boston. And then he knew one of our students who came to the Neiman Festival who was saying that, yeah, Project Step is great. So he was inquiring about Project Step from there. So the word of mouth is powerful. And it's so powerful that it's starting to become national in some way, shape, or form. So that's been a big thing for STEP.
That's awesome. I have just a few more questions about Project Step, and then I'd love to talk about Project Step and Equity Arc. And I know you just mentioned Equity Arc, so hold that thought. I saw that you all do mentorship for people who want to create programs like Project Step. So do you have a key piece of advice for organizations that want to start a program like Project Step?
I think, like we started the conversation, I think just having an undeniably strong why, right? Like really being able to say, this is exactly the need, this is exactly why we need to do it, and this is exactly how we will do it, and this is exactly how we're going to measure success, I think is the most important, at least from my perspective. Because again, like I said at the beginning of the call, like the why for Project Step was so clear that it's been able to last these past 40 years. And to this day, we're going into it, we know, oh yeah, yep, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it. And, things change along the way, but yeah, I would say that Ian's much more eloquent than I am. So maybe Ian has a more colorful answer.
Not at all. I would say that why it definitely has to be your North Star. And what Josué alluded to earlier, which is you have to make sure that if your why involves a group of people that you want to work with, that you have that group of people giving insight into what you're doing. You never want to start a program like this and conflate intent with understanding. Those two things do not go together. Intent is needed, understanding is important, but they do not go hand in hand. So you need to have the voices and perspectives of everyone that you want to work with in order to collectively develop and walk toward that North Star that Josué was talking about.
Yeah, please don't just show up to someone's neighborhood and think that you can solve all their problems without talking to
Right.
anybody.
Exactly. That's tantamount to like walking to somebody's house, going in their refrigerator and taking out all their food. Like, you were eating this? No. It's like, you need this food. It's like, I appreciate the intent, but man, that was totally the wrong way. And first of all, what are you doing in my house?
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so I'm curious to what made you all want to become an Equity Arc member. And for you, Ian, as a board member, I'm curious about what brought your interest there.
So I was at the first convening of Neiman way back when in Cincinnati. They asked me to speak as like a student because I was a part of the fellowship then. And, being in the room, it was the groundwork for a lot of the stuff that we talked about, which was like, we have this issue. I really need to figure out how to solve it. It's not the easiest thing to solve, but let's figure out something together, right? And it was in part that that call to action, even though the action wasn't fully defined, it was that call to action of just like, this is a sincere attempt to really solve, a set of problems that are going on in our industry. And it was, for me, a little surreal to even be asked to come back to the board after being one of the first ones to sort of speak there. And then once again, just being in that room, you have all of these individuals vehemently working out, once again, everything that Josué said. You said I was the most eloquent one, but not really. I mean, what Josué said before was just the why of it all, the why of why should we do this, and why is this needed, and all those things. And so that very much struck me, and it always left an impression on me. And so when it came back and they asked me to kind of come back and lead it from the board side, honestly, I was very honored to be asked back to kind of build this foundation, what I think is going to make a significant impact on the industry.
You talked about, the first meeting. I'd love to hear about both of y'all's experience at the most recent one in Cincinnati. Just what takeaways you got from it, and anything in general that you'd like to share about it.
I'll just talk very briefly because it'll connect to your previous question as well. But I think after this last convening, I was very convinced of the power of this network and what it could do. I think Equity Arc laying out all these very concrete, this is why we're doing it and this is how, was a very compelling case, specifically regarding all aspects of the development of, someone from like infants, basically almost infancy to to being a professional, right? And so, making sure that all of those pathways are clear and supported in each stage of their development, and then bringing all those people together to hash out how we're doing that. There's nothing else like that exists. And so it clearly, again, at that convening, I think they clearly defined their own space and their own purpose, completely separate from anything else that's out there. So that's what kind of convinced me for sure, that I was like, okay, cool, like, let's do it. We want to be part of those conversations. Yeah, Ian and I think, we bring a whole host of experiences, and it's on the educational side as well, spanning elementary, high school, and college admission. And then, on Ian's side, like specifically like the college and the pre-professional and the professional routes, and sort of, we've seen a lot of stuff, and I think we have a lot to contribute to those conversations. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm, really excited that we're members.
To what Josué said as well, it was the last one was just identity. Like, it was clear what it was. That first meeting I had, it was like once again, the intent was there, and it wasn't necessarily clear what it was. So I think at first, a lot of people with all this great experience were just like, I'm not exactly sure how to help just yet. And then the last meeting, it was like, oh, okay, that's the identity. That's what we're going for. This is an organization that wants to ensure that regardless of what path the student may take, that they have the right to have the same experience, quality of education, and fair shot at what they want to do wherever they go, from the start of their career all the way until, winning the audition or whatever it may look like from a professional standpoint. It's like, got it. That makes complete sense. Here's how I can help. And I think that's how everyone else felt too. It's like, that makes sense. Here's how I can contribute to that. So it was definitely a sense of identity. It was much clearer what it was about at that point.
The last question is a very broad one, but I'm curious to hear, what do you envision the future of classical music looks like?
We don't have enough time for that.
Well, I'll let you go first, Josué.
I think that, just my perspective, I think that the future of quote unquote classical music is like not necessarily calling itself classical music anymore. And I think that's probably a pretty big leap that eventually will have to happen in order to like equalize the sort of societal conception of like exactly what what we do and why we do it. And hopefully that can like help bring and bridge these sort of artificial walls that exist between that sort of bubble and then the rest of society. But again, like I said, I could go on for another hour and a half on that. So
Yeah, I would say not having an hour and a half. Maybe my simple answer to that would be hopefully classical music would not only look more like the communities in which symphonies embed themselves in, but also sounds a lot more like them as well.
Y'all summed it up well. Yes, I know we do need another hour and a half for that for sure, but I love it. That's Well, thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation. I learned so much, and I hope that the people who read this will also learn from you all. That concludes our spotlight on Project STEP. You can learn more about all our members and join the coalition at equityarc.org. Until next time, let's continue to make progress toward racial equity across the ARC.